I'm Ed DeVault, and I grew up in the little community of Leesburg near Jonesboro. And listening to Betty's conversations, I can recall that we used to use different plants in other different ways. We would use sassafras to brush our teeth, get a small piece and soften it up and use it to brush your teeth and freshen your breath. And I at one time sold mayapple root. It was used as an herb, and I don't remember exactly the use for it, but it was you dug up the roots and let the roots dry, and then you would sell it at the market. And we used
What market?
There used to be a fella here in this community whose name is Doc Graybill, and he was an herb and medicinal doctor. He wasn't a true doctor. He used herbs and herbal remedies, and he would buy it. And he knew people. There was a place in Johnson City that I think was called Graybill's that bought medicinal plants and herbs from people in the community. Willow was used. The best I remember, it contained some compound similar to aspirin for headache and pains like that. And she was mentioning ginseng. The old fellows, they used to dig the ginseng down in here, called it sang, S-A-N-G. And they were, she said, very secretive about going sang hunting because it was a high value crop and people like to keep it, the locations of it, to themselves. But we had the pokeberry, and I don't remember right now what the pokeberries were used for. We had sumac, which in certain stages is poisonous, but people knew at what stage you could use sumac for certain medicinal purposes. We had the willow, we had, as I mentioned earlier, and
now, how much did you get for your mayapple when you sold it?
Very little. I think I had 2 large feed sacks full and may have gotten $3 or $4.
Okay.
And that was dry, so you had to dig a lot of mayapple to get even that much. But we were pretty self-sufficient because basically you took most of your produce to the mill. We didn't buy flour. We'd take corn and wheat and small grain to the mill, and they would grind it and process it, and you would build up a credit, and you could go to the mill and get, a certain amount of flour for what you'd taken in and take more, and they would still continue to process and sort of keep a running credit of how much flour you were due from the grains that you had sent. There was a very, very large mill over here in a little community called Telford that was one of the major mills in this area, and that's where most of the farmers took their small grain. Small grain isn't grown as much in this area as it used to be, but wheat and oats and barley and rye were major crops at one time because there were so many more uses, and people were more self-sufficient and depended on their own grain production rather than going and buying a sack of flour or you bought salt. Basically, you needed to get salt, but there were so many things that you produced or grew on your own that there were not a lot of pre-made and pre-prepared spices and food products and things for you to use. I would have to think of some other things that we used and used on the farm for food sources and such, but I do remember that people were very self-sufficient and there wasn't much commercial grocery buying available. Eggs, people did have their own eggs. It was kind of interesting. On Sunday morning, you could go out and get a chicken for chicken dinner. People nowadays don't always seem to be very attracted to that, but that was the way of life. You used the eggs and you used the chickens, and you raised the cattle and you raised the hogs, butchered your own hogs. You heated them in a big vat and boiled them and processed all the meat and everything. And one fellow one time, that was everybody in the community was laughing about it, had his hog boiling in a big vat and had one end of the vat propped up with the rear end of an old car, and the grease was still in the car, and it got hot and blew up and blew pieces of his hog and all over the hillside. But anyway, that was the talk of the community at the time that happened to him, which was sad in one sense, but it was also humorous in another sense. And people, as your mother said, you had midwives and you delivered your own children. Another fella, his wife was getting ready to birth the baby, and he told one of his kids to go out and get the towels and the kid took off through the back field, and his father said, "I told you to get towels, not the cows." And it was a different lifestyle with a lot of unique characters that had their own ways and their own, I guess, comedic ways to handle situations. But it was a good life. It was an enjoyable life. The advantage was that everybody seemed equal. Nobody had that much more than anybody else, and you shared, and people shared their food and their produce. And if someone had some corn and somebody else needed a little bit of corn for the flour, they'd swap and share products. Made a community much closer and much more related to each other as far as the interdependence goes, because we were all self-sufficient and all had to more or less provide for each other and on our own.
Thank you.